At the beginning of my IB Visual Arts course, we were asked to choose a thematic exploration, and I had just gotten back from Kenya on a service trip at this point, and it changed me profoundly, and I thought that using the theme journey would be a really good way in showing what I learned from my trip and representing it visually in my pieces. So at the beginning of the course, the first piece I had done was this one, an oil painting, a very realistic oil painting. And the idea behind this was that this girl is trapped behind the idea that all the pressures and ideas that society has on third world countries and people. But she has an open mind and she has a bright future seen in the reflection of her glasses. So there's a building which could represent a further education. And with this piece, I really got to work with exact highlights and shadows within the face and really examining from a photograph, but altering it a bit to a very realistic image. And the glasses are skewed on the face because a lot of the children, they were taking our glasses and our jewelry and watches, and they didn't know how to put it on. So this girl, she put on the glasses and they were skewed on her face. From there, I got into block printing, and it started with this t-shirt. I went outside around the school and took pictures and compiled them in a Photoshop document where I created an interesting composition. And I think this project really stretched my composition boundaries. And from the composition with the very realistic colors, I changed it to monochromatic tones so it'd be easier to see when I printed it on the t-shirt. And I found that once I did print it on the t-shirt, it was more organic and forgiving, unlike the stark image on the paper that had been printed of the composition. And when I was changing the color to monochromatic, I changed it so that it would be easier to identify the different shapes when I screen printed this t-shirt. And I really liked the idea of printing and doing multiple images. And I had seen a lot of this in Kenya, in their patterns of the clothing they wore. And so I decided to continue on with the idea of block print, and I had done some research about henna because at this point I knew I was going to India in the summer, and I knew that henna was a very traditional art that they used on their body. So I created a block print with my own henna design that I used in 2 of the series of 3, and I also used another block print which I carved out of linoleum just to contrast it and add more simplicity to the very detailed hand. And each of the pieces are different, but they're also linked similarly because they each have hands representing coming together and helping one another. And then the bricks in the first piece represent support, and they were done with a watered down acrylic. And then the second piece was with more watercolor, and the circle representing promise and the promise to help one another. And then in the third one, I added outline to the yellow colored hands so that it added more definition and didn't get washed away with the watercolor globe in the background. So from the block print, also with this piece, I used the same or similar pattern henna design that I had created and used that in this watercolor piece as a warm tone background contrasting the elephants, which I outlined again in pen to show definition. And then at the beginning of IB2, I I researched Dikiriko, who uses a lot of, he'll use a background of either a landscape or buildings and then have human figures or mannequins in the foreground and other unusual irregular objects. So I took that idea and what I had witnessed in India. So I had taken pictures of colorful buildings that I saw there, and this is more a very illustrative journey through Kenya, and I participated in a water walk. So I took the water jugs as one of the main symbols along with the mannequin, so the human representation.
Can you explain, Jaime, water walk?
So a group and we went on a water walk, and it's where we carried jugs on our heads to a local well where we filled it with water and then carried it back to a local village to give a family or a community water for a certain amount of time. And usually the mamas of the village will walk about half an hour at least to get there and then half an hour back. So it was very interesting and a very different experience from what we're used to just turning on a tap at home. So from the very detailed illustrative pieces, I moved into the world of abstract. This piece was kind of a breakthrough piece, as I didn't really have a plan of where I wanted to go after I'd finished this one. And I was feeling a bit frustrated, so I wanted to work big scale and really just use the physicality of paint, and that's what's shown in this piece, and using a lot of block and rectangular patterns. And from this pattern, I further developed it in this piece called Boundaries. And for my later abstract pieces, I had researched Robert Rauschenberg, who uses a lot of mixed media in his abstract art. And so for this piece, I used burlap sack, cheesecloth, canvas, and fabric from a tablecloth. And I used neutral browns and oranges, and then separated or added definition to these kind of blobs of neutral colors with these darker lines to show boundaries. And I had felt like I had been isolated in these boundaries, and I wasn't really stepping outside of them or trying something new. But I feel like with the abstract and my next piece, Breaking Boundaries, it really showed how I was separating from what I had done in the first year, so the very illustrative, detailed oil painting, and moving to more mixed media and exploring new mediums, so acrylic. And in this piece, I used a shutter as my mixed media that I found at a restore. And I had broken out some of the pieces and had them scattered across the canvas to show breaking of boundaries. And I also added some circle and spherical patterns to separate from the very square linear patterns seen in the other two abstract pieces. And with this one, I had been working on it at the same time as this one, because I found with abstract I never really knew when I was done. It was really hard to have that feeling of the piece being complete. So I worked on this one simultaneously with this one, and I used some of the shutter pieces in this as well, and a lot of neutral colors, and I showed the breaking of boundaries with dotted lines instead of spherical objects or patterns. And from all of this abstract, I compiled it into my last piece, where I wanted to represent everything that I'd done over the 2 years, but focusing on the abstract because that's what I was doing most recently. And so this is called This Journey's Complete, and it's supposed to be kind of representational of a suitcase and all the stories that it has within it, and I made it so I could fold it up and take my journey with me. And I used a lot of different mixed media within this piece. I used license plates, stamps, tissue paper, old passports, and then I had 2 focal points here and there on the 2 different canvases because it is a very busy piece, and I wanted to make sure it wasn't just all scattered and make sure I had focal points within it.
You mentioned early on the theme of journey, beginning with your trips that you took to Africa and India, and then you've kind of moved through a lot of different terrain. Do you want to address that in terms of how that theme perhaps transformed?
Okay, so yeah, my journey when I first thought of the theme was very focused on my trips, and that's what I thought journey meant. But as I continued and started with abstract, with the breakthrough piece of the different colored squares, I found my journey to be the more physicality of painting and my journey of exploring paint and, yeah, the physicality of it.